The lawyer's voice on the phone was professional and distant, as he explained that I needed to come to his office immediately to sign documents transferring my assets into a trust fund. What he didn't mention until I arrived was that my son Marcus had created this trust exclusively in his own name, with himself as the sole beneficiary. I'm Eleanor Whitmore, and at 61 years old, I never imagined my own child would try to steal everything I'd spent 4 decades building. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started ordinarily enough. I was in my garden in Portland, Oregon, deadheading the roses that had been my pride and joy since my husband Daniel passed away 8 years ago. The October air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and dying leaves. My phone rang just as I was admiring a particularly beautiful bloom, a deep crimson hybrid tea rose I'd named after Daniel. The caller identified himself as Jonathan Caldwell from Caldwell & Associates, a law firm I'd never heard of. His tone was urgent but measured, explaining that there were time-sensitive documents regarding my estate that required my immediate signature. He mentioned Marcus had initiated the process and was waiting at the office. My heart had swelled with unexpected warmth. Marcus taking an interest in helping me organize my affairs? Perhaps my son was finally growing up, finally showing some responsibility. I should have known better. I should have remembered the pattern that had repeated itself throughout his 36 years of life. But hope is a stubborn thing, especially in a mother's heart. I changed out of my gardening clothes into something more presentable, a navy blue cardigan and slacks, and drove the 20 minutes to downtown Portland. The law office was in one of those modern glass buildings near Pioneer Square, all sleek surfaces and expensive furniture. The receptionist, a young woman with perfectly styled hair, directed me to a conference room on the 14th floor. Marcus was already there, sitting at a long mahogany table with papers spread before him. He stood when I entered, that familiar smile spreading across his face. The smile that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 5 years old. His wife Bethany sat beside him, her expression unreadable behind designer sunglasses she hadn't bothered to remove indoors. "Mother, so glad you could make it," Marcus said, pulling out a chair for me. "Mr. Caldwell will be here in just a moment. He's finalizing some details." I sat down, feeling suddenly uncertain. The conference room was cold despite the autumn sunshine streaming through the windows. Something about the atmosphere felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. When Jonathan Caldwell entered, he was younger than I'd expected, perhaps 40, with the kind of polished appearance that came from expensive haircuts and tailored suits. He carried a leather folder and wore an expression that managed to be both professional and slightly apologetic. "Mrs. Whitmore, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, sitting across from me. "Your son has been quite insistent about moving forward with these arrangements." "What arrangements exactly?" I asked, my unease growing. Marcus mentioned something about organizing my estate, but I already have a will. Caldwell glanced at Marcus, then back at me. "This is actually about creating a trust fund and transferring your primary assets into it. It's a common estate planning strategy that can provide certain tax advantages and ensure smooth transfer of wealth." He slid a thick stack of papers across the table toward me. I picked up the first page, trying to make sense of the legal language. My eyes caught on certain phrases. Irrevocable trust. Sole trustee Marcus James Whitmore. Primary beneficiary Marcus James Whitmore. I looked up sharply. This says Marcus would control everything. "It's standard for the trustee to have management authority," Caldwell said smoothly. "Your son would handle all the administrative details, investments, distributions. It would relieve you of that burden." "But I don't feel burdened," I said slowly. "And why is Marcus listed as the primary beneficiary? Wouldn't that mean he inherits everything while I'm still alive?" The silence that followed was heavy. Bethany shifted in her seat, her fingers drumming against the table. Marcus leaned forward, his expression morphing into something I'd seen too many times before. Concern mixed with condescension. "Mom, we need to talk about your cognitive state," he said gently. "Bethany and I have been worried about you for months now. The forgetfulness, the confusion, the way you've been making poor financial decisions." "My cognitive state?" I repeated, feeling as though I'd been slapped. "Marcus, I run a successful interior design business. I manage 3 properties. I volunteer at the art museum. What are you talking about? You forgot my birthday last month, he said, his voice taking on that patient tone people use with children or the elderly. You called me by Dad's name twice during our last visit. And Bethany told me you couldn't remember where you parked your car at the grocery store. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. I didn't forget your birthday, Marcus. You told me you were too busy to celebrate and wanted to do something next month instead. And yes, you look like your father sometimes, especially when the light hits your face a certain way. As for the parking situation, I'd parked in a different section of the lot than usual. It took me 5 extra minutes to find my car. That's not dementia. Bethany finally spoke, removing her sunglasses to reveal eyes I'd always thought were too calculating. Eleanor, no one is saying dementia. But you're 61, living alone in that big house, managing multiple properties and a business. Don't you think it's time to let Marcus help? Let him take some of the burden off your shoulders? By signing over all my assets? I looked down at the papers again, flipping through pages of dense legal text. My hands were shaking slightly, though whether from anger or fear I wasn't sure. This isn't about helping me. This is about taking everything I have. Marcus's expression hardened. That's exactly the kind of paranoid thinking we're talking about, Mom. We're your family. We're trying to protect you and your legacy. If something happened to you tomorrow, do you know what a nightmare the probate process would be? This trust ensures everything is handled smoothly. I have a will, I repeated. Everything is already arranged. Marcus inherits the house, the rental properties, and half my investment portfolio. The other half goes to charity. My business would be sold and the proceeds divided according to my wishes. It's all clearly documented. Wills can be contested. Caldwell interjected. Trusts provide more protection and privacy. And given your son's concerns about your mental clarity, having him as trustee now would ensure there are no questions later about your competency. When these documents were created, the pieces were falling into place, forming a picture that made my stomach turn. Are you suggesting that if I don't sign this now, Marcus will try to have me declared mentally incompetent? The lawyer had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm simply explaining the legal landscape, Mrs. Whitmore. Your son has expressed legitimate concerns. If those concerns escalated, there could be a competency hearing. That's an expensive, emotionally draining process. This trust arrangement avoids all of that. I stood up abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. I'm not signing anything. Marcus, I can't believe you would do this. After everything I've done for you, every opportunity I've given you, every mistake I've overlooked and debt I've paid. His face flushed red. Every opportunity you've given me? You mean controlling every aspect of my life? Criticizing every decision I made? Nothing I ever did was good enough for you. I put you through Yale, I said, my voice rising. I bought you your first car, paid for your wedding, gave you $50,000 to start your consulting business that you ran into the ground within a year. I've bailed you out of credit card debt 3 times. How is any of that controlling? You held it over my head, he shot back. Every gift came with strings, with expectations, with your disappointment when I couldn't live up to your impossible standards. This isn't about money, Mom. This is about finally being free of your judgment. Bethany placed a hand on Marcus's arm, but her eyes were on me. Look, Eleanor, let's all calm down. Nobody's trying to steal from you. We're trying to plan responsibly for the future. You worked hard your entire life. Don't you want to enjoy your retirement without worrying about managing properties and investments? I would enjoy it more knowing my son wasn't trying to rob me, I said coldly. I gathered my purse and turned toward the door. Mr. Caldwell, I assume I'm not legally required to sign anything today? Of course not, he said quickly. But Mrs. Whitmore, I would encourage you to at least consider the benefits. Perhaps take the documents home. Review them with your own attorney. I will definitely be consulting my attorney, I said. Just not about signing these papers. About protecting myself from whatever this is. As I reached the door, Marcus called out, his voice sharp with frustration. You're making a huge mistake, Mom. We were trying to do this the easy way. Is that a threat? I asked, turning back to face him. 'Cause it certainly sounds like one. He stood up and for a moment I barely recognized my own son. His expression was hard, calculating, nothing like the boy I'd raised. Take it however you want. But things are going to change one way or another. I left the conference room with my heart pounding. Made it to the elevator before my hands started shaking so badly, I had to lean against the wall. The doors closed and I was alone, my reflection staring back at me from the polished steel. When had my son become someone I didn't recognize? When had his love turned into this cold calculation? The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying the meeting in my mind, trying to understand how I'd missed the signs that Marcus was capable of this. But the signs had been there all along, hadn't they? I just chosen not to see them. Marcus had always been what my mother would have called mercenary. Even as a child, his affection could be bought and measured in gifts and privileges. When he was 8, he told me he loved me most on Christmas morning. I'd laughed, thinking it was innocent honesty. When he was 15, he'd forged my signature on a check for $300. I'd covered for him, paid back the bank, told myself he'd made a mistake.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
When he was 23 and his first startup failed, he'd blamed me for not investing more money, for not believing in him enough. Looking back, I could see the pattern clearly. Marcus took and I gave. He demanded and I provided. He failed and I caught him. At what point had I stopped being his mother and become merely a resource to be exploited? I pulled into my driveway as the afternoon light was fading. The house looked exactly as I'd left it that morning, but everything felt different now. How long did I have before Marcus made good on his veiled threat? What did the easy way imply? That there was a hard way coming? Inside, I poured myself a glass of wine with shaking hands and sat in Daniel's old study. His presence still lingered here, in the books lining the shelves, the photos on the desk, the faint smell of his cologne that somehow persisted years after his death. God, I missed him. Daniel would have known what to do. He'd always seen through Marcus's manipulation in a way I couldn't. My phone rang. Marcus. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. I turned it off entirely. The silence of the house pressed in around me, and for the first time in 8 years of living alone, I felt truly isolated. Who could I call? Who would believe that my own son was trying to steal my life's work? I thought about my friend Catherine, but she adored Marcus. She was always telling me how lucky I was to have such an attentive son. My brother lived in Boston and we'd grown distant over the years. My business partner Adriana might understand, but involving her could complicate our professional relationship. I was alone with this knowledge, this betrayal, this fear. That night I barely slept. Every sound made me jump. I kept imagining Marcus letting himself in with the spare key I'd given him years ago, standing over my bed, convincing some doctor that I was confused and needed help. By morning, I was exhausted and paranoid, questioning my own judgment. Was I overreacting? Had I misunderstood his intentions? Then I remembered his face in that conference room, the coldness in his eyes, the threat implicit in his words. No, I hadn't misunderstood anything. My son was trying to take everything from me, and he was willing to destroy my reputation and independence to do it. I made coffee and forced myself to eat breakfast, trying to organize my thoughts. I needed a plan. I needed protection. I needed someone who could help me understand the legal reality of my situation. At 9 sharp, I called my attorney, Gerald Morrison, who'd handled Daniel's estate and my business contracts for 15 years. Gerald, I need to see you today, I said when his secretary put me through. It's urgent. There was a pause. Eleanor? Is everything all right? You sound distressed. I'm not sure, I admitted. My son took me to a lawyer yesterday. They want me to sign papers creating a trust with Marcus as the sole trustee and beneficiary. They implied that if I don't cooperate, there might be a competency hearing. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the concern in Gerald's voice when he spoke. Don't sign anything. I can see you at 11. Bring whatever papers they gave you. I spent the next 2 hours reviewing every document Caldwell had provided, making notes on the sections I didn't understand. The more I read, the worse it looked. If I signed these papers, I would effectively have no control over my own assets. Marcus could sell my properties, drain my accounts, liquidate my business, and I would have no legal recourse. The trust was irrevocable, meaning once created, I couldn't change or dissolve it. Gerald's office was in a historic building in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and tall windows. His secretary, Marie, greeted me with her usual warmth, but her smile faded when she saw my face. "Oh honey," she said quietly. "Whatever it is, Gerald will help. He's the best." In his office, Gerald reviewed the trust documents with increasing alarm. His reading glasses kept sliding down his nose as he flipped through pages, occasionally making notes or highlighting sections. Finally, he removed his glasses and looked at me with an expression mixing anger and concern. "Eleanor, this is one of the most aggressive asset grab attempts I've seen in 30 years of practice. If you'd signed this, you would have essentially given your son power of attorney, signed over all your property, and waived your right to contest any of his decisions. You'd be left completely dependent on his goodwill for everything, from where you live to what you eat." My stomach dropped. Can he really try to have me declared incompetent? Is that possible? Gerald leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. In Oregon, anyone can petition for a competency hearing if they have standing, which Marcus does as your son. However, the burden of proof is high. They'd need clear evidence of cognitive impairment, affecting your ability to manage your affairs. From what I can see, you're managing a successful business, maintaining multiple properties, and handling complex financial decisions. Any competent evaluator would find you perfectly capable. But the process itself, I said slowly. That would be public, wouldn't it? It would damage my reputation, my business, even if I won. Exactly, Gerald said grimly, which is likely why they're using it as leverage. The threat of a competency hearing is often more powerful than the hearing itself. They're counting on you being frightened enough to sign away your rights voluntarily to avoid the embarrassment and expense of fighting. What do I do? I asked, hating how helpless I sounded. How do I protect myself? First, we document everything. I want you to write down every interaction you've had with Marcus. Regarding this trust, every conversation, every threat, every attempt at coercion. Second, we're going to have you evaluated by a neuropsychologist I work with, Dr. Sarah Chan. She'll conduct a thorough cognitive assessment that we can use as evidence of your competency if needed. That sounds expensive, I said quietly. I can afford it, but it feels so wrong to have to pay to prove I'm not crazy. Gerald's expression softened. I know. And I'm sorry you're going through this. But Eleanor, there's something else we need to discuss. Based on these documents and what you've told me about yesterday's meeting, I believe your son may be working with an unethical attorney who specializes in elder financial abuse. Jonathan Caldwell's name has come across my desk before, always in situations like this. Families pressuring older relatives to sign over assets, using competency threats as leverage. Are you saying this is common? The question came out as almost a whisper. That children do this to their parents? More common than you'd think, unfortunately. Gerald pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. I've handled 6 cases in the past 2 years alone. Adult children who see their aging parents not as people, but as assets waiting to be claimed. Sometimes it's greed, sometimes it's a sense of entitlement, sometimes it's resentment dressed up as concern. I left Gerald's office with a plan, but also with a heavy sense of dread settling in my chest. The cognitive evaluation was scheduled for 3 days later. And in the meantime, I was supposed to act normally, document everything, and avoid confrontation with Marcus. That last part seemed impossible when my phone showed 14 missed calls from him, and a string of increasingly aggressive text messages. The first few were almost gentle. "Mom, we need to talk. Please call me back." Then they escalated. "You're being unreasonable about this. We're trying to help you." By the 10th message, the mask had slipped entirely. "If you think you can just ignore me, you're wrong. I know you talked to a lawyer. This doesn't have to get ugly, but it will if you force my hand." I sat in my car in the parking garage, staring at those words. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through childhood illnesses, the young man I'd supported through every failure and celebrated through every success, was now threatening me. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. How could both realities exist simultaneously? How could I love someone and fear them at the same time? That evening, I followed Gerald's advice and began writing everything down. I started with yesterday's meeting, capturing every detail I could remember, then worked backward through the past year. Small things that hadn't seemed significant at the time now formed a disturbing pattern. Marcus asking detailed questions about my investment portfolio. Bethany suggesting I was looking tired and should consider hiring someone to manage my rental properties. Marcus introducing me to a financial advisor who coincidentally worked in the same building as Jonathan Caldwell. The comments about my memory, my age, my ability to handle stress. They'd been building a narrative for months, maybe longer, setting the stage for this moment when they could claim concern for my well-being while systematically dismantling my independence. The calculation required for that level of manipulation was chilling. My phone rang again. This time it was Bethany. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what approach she would take now that the sympathetic routine at the lawyer's office had failed. "Eleanor, thank God," she said when I picked up. "Marcus is beside himself with worry. You just disappeared yesterday and haven't returned any of his calls. We've been concerned you might do something rash." Something rash, I repeated carefully. Like consulting my own attorney about documents that would give my son complete control of my assets? There was a slight pause, then Bethany's voice took on a harder edge. "Look, I'm going to be honest with you because someone needs to be. Marcus has been patient with you for years. He's watched you make questionable decisions, seen you struggle with things you used to handle easily, and he's tried to help in every way he knows how. This trust arrangement is the culmination of months of research and planning to protect you." "Protect me from what exactly?" I asked, walking to my kitchen window. Outside, the garden was settling into autumn dormancy. The roses I'd tended that morning seemed like they belonged to a different lifetime. "From yourself," Bethany said bluntly. "You're at an age where cognitive decline can happen rapidly. You live alone, you refuse to acknowledge any limitations, and you're sitting on assets worth several $1,000,000. Do you know how many predators target wealthy older women? We're trying to make sure no one takes advantage of you. By taking advantage of me yourselves? The irony is almost funny. Listen to yourself, Eleanor. That paranoid response right there is exactly what concerns us. We're your family. Marcus is your only child. Everything you have would go to him eventually anyway. Why are you making this so difficult?" "Because it's my life," I said, my voice rising. "My money, my property, my choices. I worked for 40 years to build what I have. I'm not ready to hand it over to anyone, family or otherwise, especially when that family member is threatening me with competency hearings if I don't cooperate." Bethany sighed dramatically. "No one is threatening you. We're explaining reality. If you continue to behave irrationally, refusing help and making accusations against people who love you, then yes, we may have no choice but to pursue legal options to ensure you're protected." "That's not a threat, Eleanor. That's concern." The gaslighting was masterful. In a few sentences, she'd reframed my reasonable objection to financial exploitation as irrational behavior that proved I needed intervention. If I hadn't just spent 2 hours with Gerald understanding the legal reality, I might have questioned my own judgment. "I'm going to say this once, Bethany, so please listen carefully. I will not be signing any documents that transfer control of my assets to Marcus or anyone else. I am fully competent, and I have documentation to prove it. If you and Marcus proceed with any legal action against me, I will fight it with every resource I have, and I will make sure everyone knows exactly what you tried to do." There was silence on the other end. Then Bethany laughed. It wasn't a pleasant sound. "You think you're so strong, so independent, but you're just a lonely old woman clinging to money because it's the only thing that makes you feel powerful. Marcus deserves better than this. He deserves better than you." She hung up before I could respond. I stood there holding the phone, shaking with anger and hurt. Lonely old woman. The words burrowed under my skin like splinters. Was that how they saw me? How Marcus saw me? Not as his mother who'd sacrificed and supported and loved, but as an obstacle to wealth, a problem to be managed? That night was worse than the previous one. I kept playing the conversations over in my mind, analyzing every word, every inflection. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a car pull into my driveway. My bedroom is on the 2nd floor at the front of the house, and I could see headlights through the curtains. My heart hammered as I crept to the window. It was Marcus's silver BMW. He sat there for several minutes, engine running, just staring at the house. I watched him from behind the curtain, barely breathing. Finally, he got out of the car and walked up to the front door. I heard him try his key in the lock. It didn't work. Earlier that evening, following Gerald's advice, I'd called a locksmith and had all the exterior locks changed. Marcus tried the key several times, then knocked loudly. "Mom, I know you're awake. I can see the light in your bedroom. We need to talk." I didn't move, didn't respond. After a moment he knocked again, harder this time. This is ridiculous. I'm your son. You can't just shut me out like this. The pounding continued for several minutes. Then I heard him walk around the side of the house toward the back door. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the police if he tried to break in. But he must have found that lock changed too, because I heard him swear loudly, then his footsteps retreated. The car door slammed and he drove away, tires squealing slightly on the pavement. I stood at the window long after his taillights disappeared, trembling. My son had just tried to let himself into my house at 2 in the morning, presumably to pressure me when I was vulnerable and alone. The boy I'd raised wouldn't have done that. But that boy was gone if he'd ever really existed at all. Maybe I'd been so busy projecting the son I wanted Marcus to be that I'd never seen the person he actually was. The next morning, exhausted and anxious, I drove to the police station. Gerald had suggested documenting the incident, creating a paper trail in case Marcus escalated further. The officer who took my report was young and seemed uncomfortable with the domestic nature of the complaint. "Ma'am, did your son threaten you or attempt to force entry?" "No," I admitted. "But he tried to use his key after I'd explicitly told him he wasn't welcome, and he came at 2 in the morning. That feels threatening to me." The officer nodded sympathetically, but explained there wasn't much they could do, unless Marcus made explicit threats or attempted to harm me. He suggested I consider a restraining order if I felt unsafe. A restraining order against my own son. The phrase felt surreal. But I took the incident report number and left, knowing that at least there was now an official record. My cognitive evaluation with Dr. Sarah Chun was scheduled for Thursday afternoon at her office in the medical complex near the university. I'd been dreading it despite Gerald's assurances that it was purely procedural. The idea of having to prove my mental competency felt degrading, as though my entire life and accomplishments meant nothing against Marcus's accusations. Dr. Chun turned out to be a woman in her late 40s with kind eyes and a calm demeanor that immediately put me at ease. She explained that the evaluation would take approximately 3 hours and would cover various aspects of cognitive function including memory, reasoning, language skills, and executive function. We'll also discuss your daily activities, how you manage your personal and professional responsibilities, and your social functioning, she explained. The goal isn't to find problems, Mrs. Whitmore. The goal is to create a comprehensive picture of your cognitive abilities. The testing itself was surprisingly engaging. Memory exercises where I had to recall lists of words or repeat sequences of numbers. Problem-solving puzzles that required spatial reasoning. Questions about current events and general knowledge. Tasks that tested my ability to plan and organize. I found myself actually enjoying some of it, appreciating the intellectual challenge. Afterward, Dr. Chun interviewed me about my daily life. I described my interior design business, explaining how I worked with clients to envision and execute complete home renovations. I detailed my management of 3 rental properties, the decisions about maintenance and tenant selection. I talked about my volunteer work at the museum, my garden, my book club, my travel plans for the following spring. "And your relationship with your son?" Dr. Chun asked gently. Gerald mentioned there's been some family conflict. I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. I told her everything. The trust fund scheme, the threats of competency hearings, Marcus's midnight visit, Bethany's cruel words. Dr. Chun listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "How does this situation make you feel?" she asked when I finished. "Betrayed," I said immediately. "Angry. Frightened if I'm being honest. I keep questioning myself, wondering if maybe they're right and I'm not seeing clearly. But then I look at my life, at everything I'm managing successfully, and I know I'm fine." The doubt itself feels like another form of manipulation. Dr. Chun nodded thoughtfully. "That's actually a very insightful observation, Mrs. Whitmore. People experiencing significant cognitive decline typically lack that kind of self-awareness. They don't question their abilities because they've lost the capacity to accurately assess them. Your ability to examine your own mental state critically is itself evidence of intact cognitive function." She scheduled a follow-up appointment for the following week to review the test results, but her preliminary impression was clear. There was no indication of cognitive impairment. I left her office feeling validated but also deeply sad. I just spent 3 hours proving I wasn't losing my mind because my son wanted to steal from me. What kind of world was this? That evening, I opened a bottle of the good wine Daniel, and I had been saving for a special occasion. There would never be a special enough occasion now, and I needed the comfort. I sat in the living room we'd decorated together, surrounded by memories of the life we'd built. On the mantel sat photos spanning decades. Our wedding day, both of us so young and full of hope. Marcus as a baby, then a toddler, then graduating from high school. Daniel's last birthday before the heart attack, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. When had it all gone so wrong? I could pinpoint when I lost Daniel, that terrible morning 8 years ago when I woke to find him cold beside me. But when had I lost Marcus? Was it after his father died and he no longer had that counterbalance? Was it when I helped him financially and he learned to see me as a source of funds rather than a parent? Or had I never really had him at all? My phone buzzed with an email. It was from Marcus, sent to both me and Gerald Morrison. The subject line read formal notice. My hand shook as I opened it. The message was brief and clinical. Dear Mother, given your continued refusal to discuss reasonable estate planning, and your increasingly erratic behavior including changing locks and making false reports to authorities, we have no choice but to move forward with formal evaluation of your mental capacity. Please expect service of a petition for guardianship within the next 10 days. We take no pleasure in this action but believe it's necessary for your well-being and protection. Marcus. I read it 3 times, each word driving deeper like a blade. Guardianship. That was even more extreme than the trust fund. If Marcus was granted guardianship, he wouldn't just control my assets. He would control every aspect of my life, my medical decisions, where I lived, who I could see. I would become legally equivalent to a child, stripped of all autonomy. The wine glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. I didn't move to clean it up. I just sat there watching the dark red liquid spread across the wood that Daniel and I had refinished together 20 years ago, thinking this was how my life was spreading out now, broken and staining everything it touched. Gerald called 10 minutes later, clearly having received the same email. Eleanor, don't panic. This is aggressive and frankly premature, but we knew something like this might be coming. Dr. Chen's evaluation will be crucial to your defense. How did it go today? I told him about the assessment, her preliminary impression, the way I'd felt both relieved and humiliated by the entire process. He listened patiently, then outlined our next steps. We would gather additional documentation. Letters from my business partner, my accountant, my clients, my doctor. We would create a comprehensive picture of a woman in full command of her faculties. And we would prepare for a fight. But Gerald, I said, my voice breaking. Even if we win, the damage is done. My clients will hear about this. My tenants, my friends, everyone at the museum. Marcus is destroying my reputation whether the petition succeeds or not. There was a long pause. I know, he said quietly. That's the cruelest part of elder financial abuse. The accusation itself becomes the weapon. But Eleanor, you need to remember something. You've built a life of integrity and competence. People who know you will see this for what it is. And those who don't know you well enough to see through it aren't worth your concern. After we hung up, I finally cleaned up the spilled wine and broken glass. The stain on the floor remained despite my scrubbing. Some marks couldn't be erased. I understood that now. Whatever happened with the guardianship petition, whatever legal battles lay ahead, my relationship with Marcus was permanently stained. There would be no going back to the illusion of loving mother and devoted son. The next few days passed in a blur of documentation and preparation. I met with Adriana, my business partner, to explain what was happening. Her reaction was immediate and fierce. That ungrateful bastard, she said, her usually composed demeanor cracking. Eleanor, you've built this business from nothing. You're the most organized, competent person I know. Anyone who works with you for 5 minutes can see you're sharp as a tack. Will you write a letter? I asked. For the court, explaining my role in the business, my capabilities? She grabbed my hands across her desk. I'll write a letter, I'll testify in person, I'll take out a billboard if it helps. You're not fighting this alone. Similar conversations followed with others in my professional and personal life. My doctor, who'd been treating me for 15 years, was appalled and immediately offered to provide medical records and testimony. My accountant, who'd prepared my taxes and reviewed my investments quarterly, wrote a detailed letter outlining my financial acumen. Even my tenant in the duplex I own near the university, a graduate student I barely knew, offered to write about how professionally I handled property management. The support was overwhelming and necessary. Each person who believed in me became a counterweight to Marcus's accusations, evidence that I was exactly who I knew myself to be. But beneath the gratitude, I felt a persistent sadness. These people, some of whom I barely knew, were willing to vouch for me. My own son was trying to destroy me. On Sunday morning, 1 week after the disastrous meeting at Caldwell's office, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in the garden again, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of pruning and deadheading, when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, perhaps 65, elegantly dressed in a camel coat and silk scarf. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain latched. "Yes. Can I help you? Mrs. Whitmore? Eleanor Whitmore?" she asked. Her voice carried a slight accent I couldn't place. I hesitated, then nodded. "My name is Vivian Castellano. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but I have information about your son that I believe you need to hear." Something in her expression, a mixture of sympathy and determination, made me unlatch the chain and invite her inside. We sat in the living room, and she declined my offer of coffee or tea. Her hands twisted in her lap, belying her composed exterior. "I don't know how to begin this conversation," she said finally, "but I've been where you are, and I wish someone had warned me before it was too late." "Where I am?" I prompted gently. She met my eyes. "I'm a client of Jonathan Caldwell. Or rather I was. 3 years ago, my daughter brought me to his office and presented me with similar documents to what I assume your son showed you. A trust fund that would give her complete control of everything I owned." My breath caught. "What happened?" "I signed them," she said simply. "I was 62, recently widowed, lonely, and my daughter convinced me she was trying to help. Within 6 months, she'd sold my house, liquidated my investment portfolio, and moved me into a small apartment. I had an allowance for living expenses. Everything else was hers to manage." She paused, gathering herself. "It took me 2 years and almost everything I had left to fight my way out of that situation. I only recently regained partial control of my assets. My relationship with my daughter is destroyed, and I'll never recover what she spent or stole." "I'm so sorry," I whispered. "How did you know about my situation?" She smiled sadly. "The legal community is smaller than you'd think, especially among those of us fighting elder abuse cases. Your attorney, Mr. Morrison, consulted with my attorney about precedents. My attorney mentioned your case to me, and I recognized the pattern immediately. Jonathan Caldwell, the concerned child, the allegations of incompetence. I knew I had to reach out." "Why?" I asked. "I mean, thank you, but why involve yourself in a stranger's problems?" "Because I spent 2 years believing I was crazy," Vivian said, her voice intense. "My daughter told me my memory was failing, that I was making poor decisions, that I couldn't be trusted. She isolated me from friends, monitored my phone calls, made me doubt my own perceptions. It took months of therapy to undo that psychological damage. If I can prevent even one person from going through what I experienced, then maybe some good comes from my suffering." We talked for over an hour. She described the warning signs she'd missed, the gradual erosion of her independence, the way her daughter had used guilt and fear as weapons. The parallels to my situation with Marcus were striking and terrifying. This wasn't just about money. It was about power and control, about reducing a capable adult to something less than human. Before she left, Vivian squeezed my hand. "Fight him, Eleanor. Fight with everything you have. Not just for your assets, but for your dignity, your autonomy, your right to live your own life on your own terms. And remember, his accusations say nothing about you and everything about him." When she was gone, I returned to the garden and finished my pruning. The physical work was meditative, giving my hands something to do while my mind processed everything. Vivian's visit had clarified something important. This wasn't just a legal battle or a family conflict. This was a fight for my very self. That afternoon I called Catherine, my closest friend, and asked if we could meet for coffee. I'd been avoiding her since this began, worried she would side with Marcus or think I was overreacting. But Vivian's courage in reaching out to a stranger inspired me to stop hiding. Catherine arrived at our usual cafe wearing her concern openly. "Eleanor, I've been so worried. Marcus called me last week saying you've been acting strangely and he was concerned about your health. My stomach sank. What did he tell you? She stirred her latte, looking uncomfortable. He said you've been forgetting things, becoming paranoid, making wild accusations. He asked if I'd noticed any changes in your behavior. He seemed genuinely worried. And what did you tell him? I asked quietly. I told him you seemed exactly the same to me. Sharp, organized, maybe a little stressed, but who isn't? Catherine looked up, meeting my eyes. Then I asked myself why he was calling me instead of talking to you directly. And I realized I didn't like the answer I came up with. Relief flooded through me. I told her everything. The whole sordid story from the lawyer's office to the midnight visit to the guardianship petition. Catherine listened with growing horror, her hand covering her mouth when I described Marcus's email. Oh my God, Eleanor. Your own son. How could he? That's what I keep asking myself, I said. And I don't have a good answer. Greed? Entitlement? Resentment I didn't see building over years? Maybe all of those things. But the why doesn't matter as much as the what, and what he's doing is trying to steal my life. Catherine reached across the table and grabbed both my hands. Whatever you need, I'm here. Money for legal fees? A place to stay if you don't feel safe? Someone to sit with you in court? Just ask. Thank you, I said, tears threatening. I was afraid you wouldn't believe me. She shook her head fiercely. I've known you for 18 years, Eleanor. I've seen how you run your business, manage your properties, organize charity events at the museum. You're one of the most capable people I know. If Marcus is saying otherwise, he's lying, and I have to wonder why. We spent the rest of the afternoon discussing strategy and support systems. Catherine's unwavering belief in me fortified something that had been crumbling. I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't crazy. I had people who saw me clearly and would stand beside me. The following Tuesday, exactly 10 days after Marcus's email, a courier arrived with the formal guardianship petition. Gerald had warned me it was coming, but seeing the legal document still felt like a punch to the stomach. Page after page of allegations. Eleanor Whitmore demonstrates significant memory impairment. Eleanor Whitmore has made irrational financial decisions. Eleanor Whitmore exhibits paranoid ideation. Eleanor Whitmore lacks capacity to manage her personal and financial affairs. The petition was supported by affidavits from Bethany and from Jonathan Caldwell, who claimed I'd seemed confused and disoriented during our meeting. There was even a statement from a doctor I'd never heard of, a psychiatrist named Roger Hammond, who testified that based on information provided by the family, I likely suffered from early-stage dementia complicated by paranoid delusions. Gerald immediately filed a motion to dismiss based on Dr. Chen's comprehensive evaluation, which had come back exactly as she'd predicted. All cognitive functions within normal limits for age. No evidence of dementia, confusion, or impaired judgment. Superior performance in executive function and problem-solving tasks. The contrast between her professional assessment and Dr. Hammond's speculation based solely on Marcus's statements was stark. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Those weeks felt endless, each day heavy with anxiety and preparation. Gerald deposed Marcus and Bethany, and I sat in his office listening to the recordings afterward. Hearing my son lie under oath was almost worse than the original betrayal. He described incidents that never happened, conversations twisted beyond recognition, behaviors I'd never exhibited. Bethany corroborated everything, adding her own fabrications about my declining hygiene and confusion about basic tasks. The most painful moment came when the court reporter read back Marcus's statement about why he was seeking guardianship. My mother is no longer the woman who raised me. She's become a shadow of herself, unable to make rational decisions, vulnerable to exploitation. I'm doing this because I love her and I can't stand by and watch her destroy everything my father worked so hard to build. The manipulation was breathtaking, invoking Daniel's memory as though he would have supported this theft. On the morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a navy suit that projected professional competence. Catherine insisted on coming with me, sitting in the courtroom gallery along with Adriana and several other friends who'd taken time off work to show support. Their presence steadied me as I walked past Marcus and Bethany, refusing to meet their eyes. Judge Patricia Henley was a woman in her 50s with iron gray hair and an expression that revealed nothing. She listened to Marcus's attorney present their case first, outlining the allegations and presenting the affidavits. Then Gerald stood and systematically dismantled every claim. He presented Dr. Chen's evaluation and called her to testify. She explained her methodology, the comprehensive nature of the testing, and her unequivocal conclusion that I possessed full cognitive capacity. Marcus's attorney tried to suggest she'd been fooled by a lucid interval, but Dr. Chen calmly explained that the testing was designed specifically to detect patterns of impairment that couldn't be masked by temporary clarity. Gerald then called Adriana, who testified about our business partnership and my central role in every aspect of operations. She brought contracts I'd negotiated, designs I'd created, and financial records I'd maintained. My accountant followed, explaining my sophisticated understanding of investment strategy and tax planning. My doctor provided medical records showing no cognitive concerns during any recent appointments. Finally, Gerald addressed Dr. Hammond's affidavit. Your Honor, Dr. Hammond never examined Mrs. Whitmore. He never spoke with her, observed her, or reviewed any medical records. His opinion is based entirely on information provided by the petitioners, who have a clear financial interest in having their mother declared incompetent. This isn't medical testimony. It's advocacy dressed in psychiatric language. When it was time for me to testify, I walked to the witness stand with my head high. Marcus's attorney questioned me aggressively, trying to catch me in contradictions or confusion. He asked detailed questions about my properties, my business operations, my financial accounts. I answered each one clearly and precisely, providing specific figures and dates without hesitation. Then he shifted tactics, trying to paint me as paranoid and vindictive. Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitmore, that you've accused your son of trying to steal from you? Yes, I said calmly. Because he attempted to pressure me into signing documents that would give him irrevocable control of all my assets while providing me with no oversight or protection. But your son loves you, doesn't he? He's always been devoted to you. I paused, considering my answer carefully. I believe Marcus loves what I can provide for him. I don't believe he loves me as a person, separate from my utility to him. That distinction became clear when I refused to cooperate with his plans. The attorney sputtered, taken aback by my directness. Your Honor, this kind of harsh judgment against her own child demonstrates exactly the paranoid ideation we've been describing. Judge Henley looked at me thoughtfully. Mrs. Whitmore, do you understand that if I grant this petition, your son would make decisions about your health care, your living situation, your finances? Yes, Your Honor, I understand completely. And that's precisely why I'm fighting it. I've spent 40 years building a life of independence and purpose. I'm not ready to surrender that to anyone, especially not to someone who's demonstrated that he values my money more than my well-being. Gerald's closing argument was powerful. Your Honor, what we have here is not a concerned son trying to protect a declining mother. What we have is a calculated attempt to seize control of significant assets by manufacturing allegations of incompetence. Every objective measure shows Mrs. Whitmore to be fully capable. The only people claiming otherwise are those who stand to benefit financially from her being declared incompetent. This court should not reward that kind of manipulation. Judge Henley took a brief recess, then returned with her ruling. I've reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented today. I find that the petitioners have failed to meet their burden of proof. Dr. Chen's evaluation is thorough and professionally conducted. The testimony from Mrs. Whitmore's colleagues and medical providers consistently describes a woman of sound mind and excellent judgment. In contrast, the petition relies heavily on subjective observations from interested parties and speculation from a psychiatrist who never examined the respondent. She looked directly at Marcus. Mr. Whitmore, I understand that watching a parent age can be frightening, but your mother has demonstrated today that she remains fully capable of managing her own affairs. This petition is denied. Furthermore, I'm ordering that you reimburse your mother's legal fees associated with defending against this action. The amount will be determined at a subsequent hearing. The relief was so overwhelming I nearly collapsed. Catherine rushed forward to support me as we left the courtroom. Behind us, I could hear Bethany's voice rising in angry protest and Marcus trying to quiet her. I didn't look back. They no longer deserved even that much acknowledgement. Outside the courthouse, Gerald pulled me aside. Eleanor, you should know that Judge Henley could have simply denied the petition. The fact that she ordered Marcus to pay your legal fees sends a strong message. She saw this for what it was and she's punishing him for wasting the court's time and putting you through this ordeal. In the weeks that followed, life slowly returned to a new version of normal. My business continued thriving. My properties remained well managed. My garden moved through its seasonal cycles. But everything felt different now, clearer somehow, as though a fog I hadn't noticed had lifted. Marcus never apologized. He paid the ordered legal fees but made no other contact. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard that he and Bethany had moved to Seattle. Apparently, Jonathan Caldwell was based there, and they were pursuing other opportunities. I suspected those opportunities involved finding other vulnerable elderly people to exploit, but I'd done what I could by reporting Caldwell to the State Bar Association. 6 months after the hearing, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Vivian Castellano, the woman who'd warned me about what was coming. She wrote that she'd followed my case through her attorney and was thrilled I'd successfully defended myself. She invited me to lunch, saying she was starting a support group for people who'd experienced financial abuse from family members and wondered if I might be interested. I met her at a small French restaurant downtown. Over quiche and wine, we talked about our experiences, finding dark humor in some parallels and comfort in shared understanding. By the end of lunch, I'd agreed to help with her support group. Maybe my ordeal could prevent someone else's suffering. The group started small, just 5 of us meeting monthly in the community room at the library. But word spread through attorneys and elder services organizations, and within a year we had 20 regular attendees. The stories were heartbreaking in their similarity. Adult children who saw aging parents as obstacles to inheritance, spouses who isolated their partners and seized control, caregivers who exploited the people they were supposed to protect. But there were also stories of victory, of people who'd fought back and won, who'd reclaimed their lives and independence. Those stories sustained us all, reminding us that we weren't victims but survivors. One evening, as I was leaving a support group meeting, I found Marcus waiting by my car. My heart jumped, old fear and anger surging, but I forced myself to remain calm. We stood there in the parking lot, the spring twilight soft around us. 2 people who'd once been mother and son, now strangers bound only by biology and betrayal. I didn't think you'd actually show up in court, he said finally. I thought you'd cave like you always did when I pushed. That's the problem, Marcus, I said quietly. I did always cave. I gave you everything you wanted because I loved you and I wanted you to be happy. But love without boundaries isn't love. It's enabling. I raised a son who believed he was entitled to everything I had, and I have to take responsibility for that. His face twisted. Don't try to make this about bad parenting. You were smothering, controlling, always with your expectations and your disappointment. I was trying to help you, he insisted. The trust fund would have protected you. You were never trying to help me, I said. You were trying to help yourself to what's mine. There's a difference even if you can't see it. He stepped closer and I instinctively moved back. I'm your son, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore? It means I carried you for 9 months, birthed you, nursed you, raised you, supported you through every phase of your life. It means I loved you more than I've loved almost anyone except your father. But Marcus, you tried to destroy me. You accused me of insanity, attempted to steal my independence, and showed no remorse when your plan failed. Being my son doesn't erase that. It makes it worse. I won't apologize for trying to secure my future, he said stubbornly. That money should be mine. Daniel was my father too. Then earn your own money, I said tiredly. Build your own life. Stop waiting for me to die so you can inherit what I worked for. That's not a future, Marcus. That's parasitism. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never noticed before. Genuine confusion, as though the concept of earning rather than inheriting was foreign to him. When had I failed him so completely that he'd never learned self-sufficiency? I have to go, I said, unlocking my car. I forgive you, Marcus, because holding on to anger would only hurt me. But I don't trust you and I don't want you in my life. If you ever find genuine remorse, if you ever understand what you did and why it was wrong, my door isn't locked. But until then, stay away from me. I drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot, and I felt something release in my chest. The last thread of obligation, of misplaced maternal guilt, finally severed. He was an adult responsible for his own choices. I'd given him every advantage, every opportunity. What he'd done with those gifts was on him, not me. That night, I updated my will one final time. The bulk of my estate would go to the support group Vivian and I had built, funding legal defense for elderly people fighting financial abuse. A portion would go to Catherine and a few other friends who'd stood by me. Marcus would receive $1 and a letter explaining exactly why. 2 years have passed since that parking lot conversation. I'm 63 now, and my life is fuller than it's ever been. The support group has helped dozens of people protect themselves or escape exploitation. My business continues to thrive with Adriana as my partner and eventual successor. My garden has never looked better. Sometimes I see Marcus's face in my mind, not as the man who betrayed me but as the little boy he once was. I mourn for that child even as I accept the truth about the man he became. Love doesn't require sacrifice of self. Real love, healthy love, exists alongside boundaries and self-respect. Last month I met someone. Robert is a retired architect, widowed like me, with a dry sense of humor and kind eyes. We met at an art gallery opening and discovered a shared love of impressionist painting and terrible puns. It's early yet, but there's potential there. The possibility of companionship without exploitation, of affection without agenda. I'm learning that it's never too late to start over, to choose yourself, to demand the respect you deserve. My son's betrayal, as painful as it was, freed me from the burden of his expectations and needs. I'm no longer anyone's resource to be tapped or problem to be solved. I'm just Eleanor, finally living for myself. The garden is calling. Spring has arrived with its promise of renewal, and the roses need attention. I've learned to find meaning in small cycles, to appreciate the ordinary beauty of a life lived on my own terms. Some people never get that chance, trapped by obligation or fear or misplaced loyalty. I'm one of the lucky ones who broke free. As I walk outside into the morning sunlight, I think about all the women in my support group who are still fighting their battles, and I send them silent encouragement. Fight for yourselves, I think. Fight for your dignity, your autonomy, your right to exist as whole people until your last breath. Don't let anyone, not even your children, reduce you to what you can provide them. The roses are blooming early this year, more vibrant than ever. I deadhead the spent blooms and water the new growth, tending my garden the way I should have tended my boundaries years ago. It's a lesson learned late but not too late. Never too late. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.